Okay, well, welcome everybody to our last ZAP meeting of 2024. I think we had 4 this year, which I feel was pretty good considering that it was a rebuilding year and new committee for me. So thank you for all who came and for continuing to come. And I'm excited for a 2025 year with a new co-chair and some new topics to talk about. So thanks for coming. Again, turn on your videos if you'd like. Please put your questions in the chat or keep them until each presentation has ended. Again, we are being recorded. Keep that in mind from a privacy perspective. Really, the thing I want to highlight is we just want everybody to be respectful to each other. I know that ZAP topics can often get, we're passionate about it. So let's just respect everybody's opinions. And then anybody unwilling to agree to those guidelines will be excused. And I know we're not going to have any of that. So, and then if there's any other topics that you guys are interested in hearing about, know about, think that we need to highlight at a meeting, please drop that in the chat for us. We are going to be setting up our schedule in January for our first meeting in February. Our first 2025 meeting will be in February. So if there's anything we need to know about, drop it in the chat. And then with that, our agenda tonight, we're going to start out with our introduction for our new co-chair, Joel. And then we're going to do some brief intros for our 2 speakers tonight. First is going to be Councilwoman Torres talking about the Ball redevelopment area that I know there's a lot of you interested about hearing more about, even though it's just all started. And then we're having Kyle from CPD talk about One Code and the regulatory projects update. And then his partner, Brandon, well, not a partner, but another gentleman over at CPD couldn't make it tonight. So Kyle's going to be doing his part on advancing equity and rezoning. So hopefully you're all as interested as I am to hear about that. And I'm going to introduce Joel. Give everybody a wave, Joel. He's been amazing so far. I'm very grateful to have him on the team. He's already been integral in getting this meeting going. So big thanks to you, Joel. Joel is a sustainability consultant specializing in environmental policy and strategic planning for local organizations. He's currently pursuing a master's degree in environmental policy and management at UCD with a focus on urban canopy and transit-oriented development. In addition to his leadership roles within INC Zoning and Planning Committee and Executive Committee, Joel actively serves his community as a precinct organizer and as a board member for the University Park RNO. So thank you, Joel. You want to share?
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Amber, and thanks for everyone for hopping on. I just want to say I'm really excited to join this committee, though if I'm being honest, it wasn't a role I saw myself stepping into until pretty recently. So my background is mostly in sustainability and analytics, but about a year ago, within my graduate program, I signed up for a land use planning class, not because I thought it was going to be particularly interesting, but because the school made me. It was a requirement. I didn't know the first thing about it, but I was really struck by the opening of our first reading. It was a quote, and it read, "Those who fail to plan just let the future happen." And it helped me realize how intentional land use planning really is. I had always thought cities and neighborhoods just grew naturally, right? Like one block at a time. But in reality, every choice or lack of choice really shapes the spaces that we live in. And so over the semester, I became fascinated with the topic. And I think it's really neat how words on paper, right, which is essentially what land use plans are, how those words on paper can then end up transforming physical spaces and how we use those spaces over time, right? So how an overlay district can preserve a neighborhood's history, or how increasing building height minimums near transit hubs can encourage people to use more transit. It's really about, asking what kind of city do we want to be, and then making sure that we actually build it. And so I feel fortunate to be a part of a community where people like each of you take the time after your busy work days and come together to discuss how we plan to use the very limited space that we share. And I think it really shows that everyone here truly cares about the future of Denver. So over the course of the next year, I really look forward to working alongside Amber, to facilitate these conversations. I'd also like to just quickly add that I'd be more than open to grabbing coffee if anyone wants to reach out. I'll put my information in the chat. I know there's a lot of expertise that's represented here in this meeting, and I'd love to learn more about all the different things that you guys are passionate about. So with all that being said, I'd just like to pass the mic back to Amber, who's going to introduce our first speaker.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel. I thought that was great, tying it all together, because I think that we can forget that we're all on this little limited spot of land all together, just trying to make it the best we can for all of us. So we're excited to have you. And thanks for your work already. I know it's going to be good. You're a great addition to our team. Okay, there we go. Councilwoman Jamie Torres, representing District 3. Woo woo. Jamie has fought displacement, increasing affordability, inequalities, and promoted job creation and neighborhood investment. Previously, Jamie was the Deputy Director of the Human Rights and Community Partnerships Agency in the City and County of Denver, where she ensured Denver is focused on the civil rights, human rights, and social justice needs of its residents. In addition to this role, Jamie was also the Director of the Denver Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, an office she started in 2005. Geez, here I am thinking it's 2020. 2005, that's almost 20 years ago, because she saw a need for greater immigrant inclusion and acted on it. Amazing. And then back to you, Joel, for an introduction to Kyle.
Yeah, so Kyle Dalton is a certified urban planner and is the regulatory planning manager at the City and County of Denver. He leads the Department of Community Planning and Development team of about 20 city planners who bring Denver's adopted long-range plans to life through regulations such as zoning code text amendments, rezonings, design guidelines, and other tools, with a focus on keeping Denver's development regulations modern, clean, equitable, and user-friendly. He previously worked for planning departments in other Colorado and Arizona communities. He's a frequent speaker to industry, real estate, and citizen groups about Denver's hybrid form-based and context-based zoning code, and was an instructor for the Denver Citizens Planning Academy. And today Kyle will be speaking about zoning simplification initiatives, regulatory project updates, as well as advancing equity and rezoning.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, and with that, Councilwoman Torres, are you there?
I am.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, I'll take it away.
Thank you so much. And I welcome Kyle's input as we move along. He wasn't expecting it. Any probably questions about Ball Arena, but they may come up, Kyle. So I welcome any of your input as I go through. I'm going to be, are we able to see the PowerPoint there?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. Let me maximize that. There we go. Thank you everyone for joining on, and thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm going to give a bit of a high level overview of some of the major pieces of legislation that Council was asked to consider back in October related to the Ball Arena property. One of the things that I just sent over to Amber are the specific bills, and some of you may be very interested in seeing some of the bill language for each of these items. They're incredibly in-depth. The rezoning slide deck itself was almost 50 slides, so I won't include all of those here, but I will get high level and welcome your questions towards the end, but there's a lot to review. So I'll start with just a review of what is Council District 3, where is it? This is the kind of the central west part of Denver. We go all the way to Sheridan, and we even creep in there just a little bit on the other side of Sheridan at 10th Avenue. But I cover 10 neighborhoods: Auraria, Lama, Lincoln Park, West Colfax, Villa Park, Barnum, Barnum West, Westwood, Valverde, and then the top half of Marlee neighborhood. The bottom half is represented by Councilman Kevin Flynn. These are new boundaries. So in the redistricting process, Council District 3 grew by the western half of West Colfax, by the Auraria neighborhood. So the neighborhood that we'll be talking about today is relatively new to District 3, and Valverde. So 2.5 neighborhoods, District 3 grew by, became effective in July of 2023. So Ball Arena property on October 21st, this was the night of multiple public hearings and other votes that we took. And these are the 6 votes or 6 items that we voted on. So the first I'll cover is the rezoning application. The second is a development agreement that the city agreed to with the property owner, which is Cronky Sports. We amended the code to exempt this particular, the new zone district, from the height limitations of the old City Hall view plane, which I'm sure will be a lot of questions about that one because brought up a lot of questions for council as well. There was also an arena trust agreement amendment, created several metro districts for this property. And then there was also an amendment to the development agreement for the River Mile, which had previously been rezoned and a development agreement put in place prior to me coming in 2019. So the rezoning, and this is the only slide that I'll have for the rezoning, but I'm also happy to bring up any of the slides from the actual slide deck about rezoning. This was originally zoned MU30 with waivers, and the proposed zoning was to make it kind of align the zone district with River Miles Zone District, which is a DCPV, which is the Central Platte Valley. And this is the only part of Denver where we find this particular zone district. It was built with particular building forms in mind for what could go into this particular part of town, and a variety of kind of additional considerations for what could happen on these properties. DPVC and DPVT. So those are the 2 zone districts that were brought for rezoning. You might be asking what this little donut hole here is, which is still CMX8. It was not included in the rezoning that council considered on October 21st. That property is not owned by Cronky. It is a separate owner, and they're actually coming through city council now. They will be in the South Platte River Committee on January, I believe it's January 11th, for their rezoning to the Central Platte Valley Zone District as well. But that came through later, not part of this particular zone district. I can get into more of the respective slides from the rezoning, but this is what was proposed to Denver City Council. The development agreement. So this was an agreement arrived at between the city and Cronky Sports, and included these key areas: affordable housing, which was agreed to at 18%. You'll see this mirrored in the community benefits agreement, which I'll cover towards the end. An agreement about open space, how much open space would be included on the property. And while this is conceptual, there is a pretty concrete proposal for what is basically a central oriented park. That park, it would then be built and then conveyed over to Denver Parks and Recreation. So this would become a Denver park after it's built. But 12% of the overall property is dedicated to open space. There are several economic development components of the development agreement. I think the key ones that were included in this have to do with alignment with the city's career construction program, a child care facility to be built on site, and a certain percentage, I believe it was 20% of the jobs created on site would be permanent jobs. So it wouldn't just be the construction jobs helped to build the property, but permanent jobs once it's actually built. There are components around fire safety. Fire Station 6, which is on Spear, is the closest responding fire department to this property and to River Mile. And so there's some language in there about improving some of the facility there. We did open up a bit more of a conversation about, if 6,000 total units are included on just this property, River Mile has several thousand more. Would there need to be a fire station within these properties? There's a possibility of that, but it was not included explicitly in this. That might be a future conversation between the city and the property owners. There's some environmental language. This is about environmental assessment per one of the executive orders that's established in the city that has to do with real estate and land conveyance and the environmental needs that come along with that. And then some vesting language. So the vesting language means what is carried on this particular rezoning, whether it's building heights, building forms, uses of the property, those remain in place per what we passed on October 21st until 2050. So even if the city modifies maybe area plans, neighborhood plans, other things in the zoning code, those would not affect what these properties would be planning to utilize through the year 2050. So that's what vesting rights are. You'll notice one of the other things that we voted on in council was amending the River Mile vesting component of their development agreement to align with the same date. The old City Hall view plane, I have a few slides about this because it was a huge topic for us in Denver City Council. The brown area is what is considered the view plane of old City Hall view plane. It originates at 14th and Larimer. There is a bell there that was actually where the original City Hall was for Denver, and that's what kind of memorializes that view plane. The view is protected only from that point on the ground and not from buildings a block away or several stories up. That's not the view that's protected. It is the view from that particular point. That view plane was the most impacting of this property. You'll see kind of the outlined area in red, how much of it it would be affected by that view plane. The capital view plane affects this particular small part, but it didn't play a role in any of the development plans for the applicant. So it was not necessarily something that we needed to consider in any of the development discussions that we had, either about rezoning or about the view plane impediment. You'll see that Old City Hall view plane doesn't just affect this property, it goes all the way to Federal Boulevard. So that's this boundary line all the way on the left side over here and down to Holden. So this is where the Broncos Stadium is at right here, which had previously been allowed to pierce that view plane in order to build the current stadium that we have right now. But then it also covers a good part of the Sun Valley neighborhood all the way down to Holden down here. A couple images were provided by CPD as we took a look at why would we exempt this property from the view plane. This is an image directly from that point of origin at that bell at 14th and Larimer. And this line right here is the height limitation of that view plane. You'll see that there are a number of existing buildings and new buildings that have been constructed on the Auraria campus. Because it's state-owned land, it doesn't have to comply with our local view plane laws. So they didn't have to stay under that view plane location as they built out Auraria campus. So one of the issues is that you don't even see the mountains from that view plane, and it's the view that's protected is of the mountains. So this gave us a little bit of example of a couple different things. So this dashed line is how the stadium, the Mile High Stadium, pierces that view plane. It just comes above that that line there that's established. And then the yellow indicates what is outside of the view plane. So all of this territory that was brought to us, the Kroenke, the Ball Arena territory, is not impacted by the view plane at all. So we're really talking about kind of these green dashed lines of where potential building heights absolutely pierce that view plane. And whether or not that was kind of all of the other things that came with the rezoning, with the development agreement, with the community benefits agreement, whether that was justification enough for us to allow them to be exempted from that view plane. So all of these discussions definitely came into play. This is another really interesting view that was provided to council. The orange being kind of the threshold of the view plane and where buildings pierce it now. So these are some of the Auraria buildings that already pierce that view plane. And then where some of the proposed heights of the ball arena development could potentially pierce that view plane. So what those would definitely would look like. I don't recall what height this was taken from. Kyle, I don't know if you do at all, but that this was, I think, an important one that was provided to us as well. Clearly from this height, you can still see the mountain range there as well. So those were the first 3 items that came to council for a vote. The other 3 were the arena trust agreement. So there's an agreement in place right now that where Cronky agrees to keep his teams in Denver in operation on that site. This extended that agreement until 2050. So 2050 is the date you'll see aligned for the vesting rights as well as this arena trust agreement. Metro districts. So this vote created 5 metro districts for this property. 4 will be financing districts. 1 is an overlay maintenance district, not one that includes any mill application. And then for the property overall, the maximum mill levy would be 70 mills on top of the city's mills. So it absolutely will, metro districts absolutely increase property taxes in order for them to finance the development of this particular neighborhood, frankly, or component to the Auraria neighborhood. And then finally, the amendment to the River Mile Development Agreement, which had already been approved prior to 2019. This brought their vesting rights in line with the Ball Arena vesting rights. So the same timing. They haven't begun any construction. Obviously, Elitch is still on that property, and they didn't have any information to share about how long Elitch's would be there, where they would be going. But this vesting rights gives them kind of the zoning that's in place here and all of the agreements until 2050. The community benefits agreement, and I can show a couple different, or Amber, I think you said you have some slides of these as well. So the community benefits agreement is not something voted on by council. This is created in negotiations between property ownership, Cronky Sports, and a community committee. And they worked on this over 18 months. It included all of these particular kind of topical areas: affordable housing, which is in line with what the city put into its development agreement, a small business initiative, below market commercial rent for the commercial properties, childcare facility, also like the development agreement, free community events. There were agreed upon thresholds for that. Cultural recognition. This was one thing that I was really proud of the community and ensuring was in place. And this has to do with recognition of both displaced Aurarians, who once called this neighborhood home before it became a campus, and our Indigenous community, who have a long history of occupation along the Platte River throughout this corridor all the way to the confluence. So there were a lot of conversations with Indigenous community members. What was included in this are commitments to seed scholarship funds, as well as incorporation into number 10 here, which is the Community Investment Fund. There's an incorporation of arts throughout the property, and local artists in particular being utilized to create that art, infrastructure requirements, discussions about Excel Energy. This was a huge topic that comes up often in my other neighborhoods of Sun Valley and Lama Lincoln Park, that for neighborhoods that are going to be several thousand housing units that are going to be built, where their energy comes from really matters. Where are they going to have substations? How are they going to power a location such as this? And discussion around ensuring on-site power and substations would be made available here was language that was included in the community benefits agreement. We have a substation in Sun Valley now. The decommissioned power plant on 13th and Zuni that is no longer an energy location, but these are neighborhoods that have traditionally provided power to Denver and the West Side, and they want to make sure that they are not overburdened with the power needs of a property like this and a River Mile in the future. And so that was a big discussion for a lot of neighbors around these proposed neighborhood developments. And finally, a community investment fund that they predict over time would be developed into about a $16 million community investment fund. And the community benefits agreement has language in place around a committee that would be created that would include residents of this future development, as well as stakeholders on how that community investment fund could be used and the kinds of things that those dollars can be spent on. So there is a 2-pager that I sent to Amber that I welcome folks to take a look at. The full community benefits agreement is in the rezoning language. I'm sorry, the rezoning website on Legistar. So I sent Amber that link as well. So if you go to the rezoning page, all of those documents, the actual community benefits agreement is in there. Those are my slides. I would love to take any questions. I'd love to go back to any images, or if there's specific questions about any of the bills that we ended up passing in City Council.
Yeah, we do have a few questions, starting with Bruce Basquet. I assume there's going to be a parking garage somewhere holding how many vehicles and at what % of current surface parking?
Sure, thank you for that. That's, I think, undetermined because they haven't done a full site plan. Kyle, I don't know if you recall any of this, but I think they're planning for parking to be within the buildings. I'm not sure how much actual surface parking they're going to have, but that it would be a part of the buildings that are built and parking to be made available there. And I don't recall a number that's going to be required or a percentage that's going to be required. It's not coming to me that that was an actual requirement that we had in any of the language.
Robert,
right,
you want to go? You're on mute, Robert.
I have to unmute to be able
There
to
you go.
talk. A follow-up question to the previous one before the one that I put in the chat. Where I understand that buildings would have parking that would most likely handle most of the activities in those individual buildings. Where is the attendees to Ball Arena parking going to go?
That would be the same. So they're proposing using a number of the buildings that are going to be developed to be used for on-site event parking, as well as like the neighborhood parking. And so that would be included in a lot of the buildings. I cannot recall that they shared how many spaces are currently on Ball Arena right now. And unlike the stadium, Mile High Stadium has a particular number that they have to have on site because it's a state approved multi-county district, right? That manages that location. They have a particular number. Ball Arena does not. So they would need to create those spaces within the buildings for people traveling in to utilize. There's a lot of attention toward the 2 light rail stations that serve directly this property. The one that is right in between Elitch's / River Mile and Ball Arena, as well as the other on the far western side that is directly right there with at their property line as well.
Okay, and my question is on the conceptual site plan, there are a number of the buildings scattered across the site plan that were outlined in blue. Does that blue outline indicate buildings that will have affordable housing units in it?
Good question. Let me put that back up again. This is the slide that you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay. They likely could be. So in each part of these sections is a certain requirement of affordable units. So one of the things that was really good about the development agreement is that it would not allow Ball Arena to isolate affordable units to say the far section of their development. It has to be interspersed throughout the entire development. And these are the numbers that we would see there. So they could be, I think in the red, they're identifying kind of what might be the more dense affordable housing. So they've talked about like a building here, another building potentially with a partner, Mercy Housing, on this side, but the rest would need to be interspersed throughout all of the other buildings that they develop.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Robert.
So
Joel, you want to do a chat question?
yeah, Jennifer Qualteri says, I would hope there's a mix of neighbors. I think that you're saying no 4 doors, so kudo if that is true.
I think that's right. One of the full affordable housing buildings that is conceived on this is also a permanent supportive housing. So that would be 100% affordable. They may be able to build 100% affordable, but ranges of affordability. So it would not be all 30% area median income affordability. It would need to be a range because they're seeking a median of, I believe it was 60 to 80% area median income on those fully affordable buildings. So it would be a range of incomes. And then the rest of these would also be area median income ranges. Let me see if my notes have something more specific around that. I'm not seeing that immediately, Jennifer, but there were, and that was a really important thing to me. The other really important thing was that these were not just studios or 1 bedrooms. When this neighborhood, this future development is conceived, it's got to be a place where families can also live. And so there was a particular emphasis on multiple bedrooms. That's why the childcare facility became really important. This is not, just for single individuals, just for students, but it could be inclusive of all of those folks. So the range of those things became a really powerful thing as we began looking at kind of all of the things that were contemplated.
Awesome. Okay, Cindy, we'll go to you and then we'll get to Richard's question in the chat last. And then if there's any other burning questions that you guys have for Councilwoman Torres, email either my email, Joel's email, or the Inks app. And if there's any other questions, we can reach out. Would you be willing to answer their questions if they come in, Jamie?
Yeah, 100%. I can even answer
Amazing.
questions later over email if folks
Okay.
kind of take a look at documents. Yeah, this is my district and I'll be interested as well as to see how folks are looking at this.
We appreciate it. Okay, Cindy, you want to go?
Sure. Jamie, what is the overall view of City Council with exemptions to view planes? Is this going to set a precedent or is this an exception to the rule?
I think it was a pretty clear exemption or exception to the rule. One of the things that I'll say is we were asked and we denied removing the view plane altogether. I think there has been a lot of conversation about that piece. And for me, I didn't want to set a precedent of getting rid of city view planes. Let me see, I have a slide actually that can show what we're looking at when we're talking about all of the city view planes. So this was kind of interesting for me to see, and these are all of the city's view planes that we have and what kind of territory they cover. This one was exceptional, I think, because of Auraria campus and how those buildings already took away the view at that view plane. So the view itself was not was not still there. It was not protected. What remains though, and was important for me as a representative of a district and wanting to make sure that we get really strong outcomes for community. A view plane requires parties to come to the table to talk about if we are going to pierce something that is in Denver law, why would we be doing that? And so that's I think what prompted most of the deliverables around the depth of affordable housing, the kind of the broad mix that we ended up getting, all of the agreements that we got, both in the community benefits agreement as well as the development agreement with the city. And it forces people to come to the table. And if the Broncos decide to build a new stadium, right, on that property, or keep their stadium and make good of the district that they've been wanting to build on the south parking lots of that property, I want to make sure we have a real conversation about what the community gets in return for piercing a view plane. So it was a really odd conversation to talk about something that is no longer there, a view from that particular point. But it definitely created a broader conversation for me as a rep for West Denver, because there is more territory than just the Ball Arena territory that has to do with that old City Hall view plane.
Great, thank you. And one
Mhm.
other thing, 18% affordable housing is getting higher. Do you foresee in the future that might go higher than 18%?
It's possible. I think that the struggle that we have is what's realistic given like the cost to actually build anymore, and what that could look like. Originally this number started at about 15% and inched its way higher. So I personally would like to see more affordable housing and built into brand new developments like this. But I was pretty satisfied with the variety of affordable housing that we'll be getting out of this. It's not just rental, it's also ownership. One of the things I can probably show as well are some of the community benefits agreements that were also arrived at. So this is some of what the community arrived at. It is largely, particularly the housing, mirrored in the city's development agreement. But this creates, I think, a real sound opportunity for us to capture just a broader range of affordability opportunities for Denver residents, and for this to be a really mixed part of the neighborhood.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for the question, Cindy. And for the sake of time, Keith, I see your hand is raised. And Richard, you had a really good question, but I'm going to save those so we can stay on track. So Kyle can get through both of his presentations. So I will email Jamie these questions and then get answers to you guys. So Keith, send me or put it in the chat, whatever your question is, and then we'll make sure that we get an answer for you. And then with that, I am going to go back to screen sharing.
Thank you for the opportunity, everyone. Just welcome any of your questions later if they come up, but I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk.
Thanks for coming as always. We appreciate you. Okay, let me slideshow. Yes. Okay, you ready, Kyle?
I'm ready.
You're up.
Thank you.
And I'll
Amber.
try to be intuitive in not having you to tell me to change slides. So I'm gonna try and read your mind. We'll see how good I do.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
I'll rely on you then. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be back. It's been a few years. See a few familiar names and several I don't know. So thanks for having me. And I think the councilwoman did a great job. You know way more about Ball Arena than I do. But I'm gonna take us a step back from site-specific zoning matter to citywide zoning matters. I was asked to talk about one code as an idea, but and then share a little bit of the frame of what's happened in 2024 and what we expect to happen in 2025 for major zoning changes. So I think we'll hit a couple of the questions that Cindy had in the chat at the beginning of the meeting. But I have to start when I talk about zoning by talking about planning. I know this is the zoning and planning committee, but at Denver's Community Planning Development Department, we start with planning and then zoning, because everything we do is guided by the city's long range plans that are adopted by city council, first at the citywide scale, then neighborhood plans and other small area plans that refine that citywide direction. That's what leads to the city council ultimately adopting changes to codes that regulate development, and then the department administering that development. So what do we mean when we talk about one code? Well, there's this idea that we should have one code in the future, because today Denver has two zoning codes. There's one zoning code called former chapter 59. That's the older of our two codes. It was first adopted in the 50s. It's been amended hundreds of times since then, but it applies still in about 16% of the city. It's kind of shown in the peachy color on this map here. And it remains in place for the parts of the city that had some kind of customized regulation, custom site plan up until 2010, when the city adopted the Denver zoning code for the remaining, at that time, 75% of the city. Now 84% of the city is under the newer Denver zoning code. So we have these two different codes, depending on, every site is only in one code or the other code, but across the city, we have these two that we use. And it presents a number of challenges. So the first is, there's an equity or a fairness issue with different neighborhoods of the city being treated differently. And it's particularly acute in the far northeast, where on that map on the previous slide, you'll see a lot of that area is in former chapter 59. Generally, the areas that have former chapter 59 zoning are often areas that were developed in the later 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. But so particular areas of town have one code that operates under older, different rules than most of the rest of the city. It's also a burden for people who do work in Denver on property to have to know two very different codes and how to do that work. It complicates things when city council wants to change the rules, because we have two different kinds of rules. And if city council wants to make a change and modernize, what we do with zoning, you've got to somehow get those two codes to talk to each other in order to advance that change, which affects the kind of work that we do in my office. And then it also is inefficient for permitting. It gets in the way of our ability to, in a timely manner, turn things around for people who are having their permits reviewed, because welcome to the city and county of Denver, you've got to learn two whole books in order before, or at least how to navigate two different books before you can actually know how to sign off on plans and permits and inspect against them. So those are just some highlights of the challenges that we have with two codes. So the idea here in the future is we should have one code. And the vision for that comes from, as I said at the beginning, the city's long-range adopted plans that city council has articulated the vision for the city in. Blueprint Denver, which is our citywide land use and transportation plan, recommends that the city rezone properties from the former chapter 59 so that the entire city in the future can be covered by the Denver zoning code. And then that citywide direction has been reinforced several times now by our neighborhood planning initiative plans, which are our NPI plans that cover a few neighborhoods at a time. All of them that have been adopted so far, in one way or another, also recommend removing this former chapter 59 zoning. So in order to do that, what it will take in the future is a whole project, which the working name for it is one code. It's jazzy, but we'll see what we actually call it when we do it. But based on the research that we've done to date and our conversations with other communities who embarked on similar work, we know this kind of a project would take at least 2 years. And there are a number of reasons for that. But as I mentioned earlier, there are 16% of the city still is under this code. That is thousands of properties who will need to be engaged with if we're going to change the rules about what they can do on their property. It's going to require extensive citywide community conversation about those properties, as well as engagement with those individual property owners in order to do at least 3 things to make that happen. Now, the first is maybe the most obvious. We've got to change the zoning map to change it from a zone district in that former chapter 59 into the Denver zoning code. But we also would have to do a couple other things. We'd have to address procedures for how to address these areas that have custom zoning, just using the newer code instead of the older code. And then there is zoning references all over in different codes and different rules and regulations that talk about what vegetation is allowed in this zone district versus that zone district, where you can get a marijuana license that references this code and that code. So we need to clean, it's, you know, there's a lot of cleanup to do in various parts of the code, not just in zoning, when we get rid of a whole body of zoning code. This is not a project that's currently scheduled. It'll be a big undertaking when we do it sometime in the future. So I want to talk a little bit about what we are doing in the meantime, before we do a one code project at some point in the future. So one of the things that we're doing right now that's making a big dent in the areas of the city that have former Chapter 59 zoning is what we call legislative rezonings, or you could also call them proactive rezonings. And the way that this has been working for the last couple of years is that our department, in partnership with the council members in areas who represent areas that have had planning through the neighborhood planning initiative, are working together to rezone those, you know, large areas of the city proactively, the city doing it, not having the property owner have to do it themselves, from former Chapter 59 to Denver zoning code. So as a neighborhood plan gets adopted and it says these areas should come out of former Chapter 59 and go into Denver zoning code, right there, while the community's already having that kind of conversation, our folks are engaging in, you know, what should the district be instead, and how do you translate between former Chapter 59 zone districts and the newer Denver zoning code districts. And we do that all at once. The city does it, so there's no cost to the owners, the applicants, the community to do it. And it's a departure because most of the rezonings, the changes in the zoning map that the city sees, are initiated by a private property owner, one at a time for just their single property. So this proactive effort can go and take down several, you know, anywhere from a dozen to hundreds all at once. And the neat thing about it is it builds upon that momentum. While the community's already been engaged in the planning process or at the table expressing the vision for the future of their neighborhoods, we can have that same conversation about, okay, how should we zone to carry out that planning vision, rather than come back a few years later, people have moved on or forgotten what they were talking about or what they'd agreed to at the time. And we can also do other things with legislative rezonings and have. So again, legislative or proactive rezonings can also achieve other plan recommendations using existing zone districts that are on the books. Sometimes they have to be paired with other tools in order to really achieve all of the objectives in the plan. So it's not as simple as just doing rezoning, but we do what we can. And now this is part of our standard practice as neighborhood plans get adopted. So on the next slide, you can see where we've done that work so far and where we plan to do it soon. So in 2024, this year that's about to wrap up, we have been focusing on the most recently adopted NPI planning areas, west, near southeast, and near northwest in red. City Council has already now adopted that west area legislative rezoning. We've got near southeast is coming to City Council here for for final approval in about 3 weeks. And then near northwest is close on its tails in a couple months. In the meantime, our colleagues in long range planning have already started the planning processes for the next neighborhoods, which are the ones in green, southwest and far southwest. So we will once again be working in those neighborhoods as well to rezone proactively areas from former Chapter 59 to Denver zoning code, as well as other zoning to other rezoning that's needed to implement the recommendations of those plans. Okay, so why haven't we done a one code project? Well, here's what else we have been doing in 2024 and a preview of what we plan to do in 2025. So far this year, of the major code changes that City Council has approved, we were talking about the first couple right as the meeting was getting started. The city now allows accessory dwelling units citywide where residential is allowed. We've legalized manufacturing home communities. City Council has just passed a bundle of text amendments. There's 100 text amendments or so that kind of clean up the code in a variety of different ways. And then I mentioned earlier, there's the West Area Plan rezoning that got adopted. And then we've also been working on 4 other projects that are nearing adoption. So I already mentioned the near southeast and near northwest area plan rezonings. I'll talk a little bit later about the Advancing Equity and Rezoning project. And then another project to regulate new gas stations has been at work this year and will be adopted early next year. Here's the list of things that we've announced we are launching in 2025. I'm just giving you the high level of what they are. I certainly can have folks come back in the interest of time. We can have our project teams come back and share more about these if you'd like in the future. I mentioned the Southwest and far Southwest area rezonings. We also announced last week we'll be doing a citywide project in 2025 to update Denver's landscaping rules, to modernize our parking requirements, and then not yet launched, but we have announced that we plan to launch next year a project to unlock housing choices by enabling different kinds of housing in more areas of the city. So again, those are the highlights. We can definitely come back and talk more about the projects, but I was asked to keep it to 10 minutes. I'm already closer to 11 minutes. So I'll stop talking about this and see if you have any questions before I move on to advancing equity and rezoning.
That was amazing. You're so
Thanks.
easy to understand. Thank you. Sometimes
Okay.
I'm like, oh my God, what are you saying? That was so great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amber.
Joel, you want to share some questions from the chat?
Yeah, starting with a more high level one from Robert Schmid. Do either of the 2025 area already have an existing plan?
That's a great question. So I think if I understand it correctly, do any of the neighborhoods that are included in the 2025 neighborhood plan initiative plans have existing plans? Well, first, the entire city is covered by our citywide plans, comprehensive plan and blueprint Denver. And then at the smaller area scale, I know in the Southwest area, at least, there's the Westwood neighborhood plan. It's now about 8 years old, so it's time, it's included to be updated. And then let's see, in Southwest, there's also the Evans Station area plan, which is several years old, which is even older than Westwood neighborhood now. I'm not the long range planning guy, so I'm probably missing a few of those plans, but a lot of the Southwest and far Southwest areas have never had a neighborhood plan, and this will be the first neighborhood plan for those areas.
Robert, your hand is up. Did you want to elaborate or?
I had just a follow-up. So is the Westwood plan, is that geographic area smaller than the one that's noted on your map?
That's right. The Westwood neighborhood plan was just through the Westwood neighborhood. Now the neighborhood planning initiative, in order to cover more of the city faster, does has these neighborhood planning initiative plans that cover multiple neighborhoods at the same time. So Westwood is just one of the Southwest area neighborhoods that will be covered by the Southwest area plan when it's adopted next year.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good question.
We have a question from Michael. This is a great presentation. I was on the recent NPI for the near Northwest area plan. I know that my neighborhood, Jefferson Park, is in the proposed rezoning package. Some old zoning out of Chapter 59 is changing, but it feels like it's very random. Why is 100% of old Chapter 59 not being rezoned? And if some properties are being left out, who is determining which ones to correct and which ones to leave alone?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll have to follow up directly with our near Northwest rezoning team to get you the specifics. But so I can speak in generalities because I don't have the specific information about that project. But as I mentioned, these efforts are a partnership between our department and the council member, and so we work together to find where there is an existing zone district that could be that we could map a former Chapter 59 area to a new district. These efforts don't include the resources to write whole new zoning. So sometimes it's the case that it's just not possible to find an existing district that's a good match for that area. It would need to it need its own project to write all new zoning for an area. So that's one reason why it may not be a clear translation. Like I said, they're two different codes that have like totally different districts. So it's hard sometimes to know. There is no obvious translation. There's always a trade-off. Well, it's a little bit, you can do a little bit more development, but you can't do as many uses, or it could be taller, but we'd have different parking. So sometimes based on that community feedback, it's not obvious what to change or the feedback of the property owner. So again, we do as much as we can in partnership with the community and the council member at the time, but there will still be areas that need to come back later and get swept up in a future one code effort.
Another question from Jennifer Walteri. I'm worried about our historic districts. When you say different housing, what is the plan to protect our historic districts?
Different housing. What is the plan to protect our historic districts? Well, that's a good question. So, Denver has separate from zoning, landmark districts that are historic districts that put in various protections for the structures and the buildings that are within the districts, including demolition review, design review of new buildings as well. And the rules kind of change, but it operates a bit separately from zoning. But areas that are designated for historic preservation have extremely high barriers of review before they can qualify for demolition, and as well as the design, to ensure that new development is compatible with the historic context.
Thank you. Another question, it's from Lisa Williams. Why not update zoning to reflect Blueprint Denver or the NPIs that have been done? Planning staff and city council still have to individually approve rezonings that reflect what Blueprint and the NPIs clearly want.
Yeah, so I think that is more or less what we're doing here. The legislative or proactive, if you prefer, rezoning packages are intended to reflect what MPI, which again follows from Blueprint Denver, recommend do. So this is relatively new in Denver. It's not new in the world to follow the adopted plan immediately with rezoning to implement the parts of the plan that relate to zoning. So it is true, city council still has to approve any change in zoning. That is their authority by charter, but it's sure a heck of a lot easier to have city council approve one change on a Monday night for dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of properties, than for each one to come in one at a time. The owner bearing the burden of the outreach, the owner bearing the burden of the cost. We can advance the city's objectives much more readily by having these proactive efforts that do follow right behind the MPIs.
Great, thank you. I think that's all the questions from the chat. I see Michael Henry has his hand raised, so Michael, go ahead. Michael, I think you're there. There we go.
Kyle, very good to see you again.
You too.
If I could just make one point, and I think you're familiar with it, but when many of us worked on the zoning code task force, which resulted in the 2010 zoning code, there was quite a bit of discussion about what about all of the planned unit developments and other waivers and conditions that had been placed on different pieces of land all across the city. And I know that's what you're trying to address right now. But some of us were very concerned that there had been a lot of negotiation between immediate neighbors and immediate RNOs over a particular rezoning. And some of us seem to have the idea that the whole concept of this one code is to get rid of all of that individual negotiation that was between immediate neighbors and immediate RNOs. And I'm hoping that you have a way to try to reach out to those immediate neighbors and immediate RNOs. And I know that a lot of them are probably not in existence anymore, but could you give us your thoughts on how you won't just disregard those negotiations?
Yeah, it's a great point, Michael, and you're right. A lot of the plan unit developments or waivers or conditions that are what we call all of that custom zoning that are in the former Chapter 59 are there because they were negotiated for some reason. And exactly what you said is why here we are 14 years later, and they haven't all been undone, and why as I mentioned, it would take years to do it. It is precisely because it will take hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations with the owners and the immediately surrounding communities to unpack and understand what it could be instead. And so I kind of think of that. There's, I think, 4 different potential outcomes. So one is that there's a PUD in the former Chapter 59, a unique set of rules just for one site. That's what a PUD is. That it is still so unique. It needs its own unique rules. We would just need to translate from a former Chapter 59 PUD to a Denver zoning code PUD, because we still do PUDs today. There still are unique cases. We could just keep a PUD, but get it out of the old code PUD and make it a new code PUD. So that's one potential. There are a few others, though. As we take a look around the city at the areas that have former Chapter 59 zoning, there's generally kind of 3 different buckets that you find them in. One is it was conceived for a project that never happened. It got zoned however many years ago. Never happened. The developer went away. They've sold it. Someone else owns it now. For one reason or another, what was negotiated was for a project that never materialized. So it's still either just the same thing as it was before it got rezoned, or maybe vacant land. So there's an opportunity for a just entirely different kind of conversation. The second category of things are things that are built. So they got built according to the plan, the negotiation of whatever it was. And so you now know what the thing is. It's no longer a theoretical thing you're future zoning for. It's been built, it exists, people are coming and going. And so you can zone to that. And you may need to still have waivers or conditions or some other kinds of agreements. There are a variety of different flavors of agreements out there to ensure that future redevelopment is consistent with that. And then there's kind of a third category of things that are currently in development. And those are the ones that are kind of trickiest to change the zoning on, because they're developing in the moment under a certain set of rules, and you don't want to pull the rug out from any of them. So all of which is to say, there are a variety of different potential possibilities. Some are going to be easy, some are going to be really hard. That is why it would be a citywide effort of engagement with the owners and the communities, the neighborhood organizations, in order to change their zoning.
So thank you. I think that's all the questions, at least for this topic. Again, if anyone has additional questions, feel free to send them through. Just in the interest of time, we should probably switch to the next topic. I know we have quite a few slides to get through. This next topic is advancing equity in rezoning. And Kyle, I'll let you continue just taking it away.
Great, thanks. And I'm pitch hitting, as you said, for a colleague of mine. So I'm going to rely a little bit more on my notes from him than I was for the last one, but I'll do my best. So I've got 4 things to talk to you about tonight. First, a little bit of background on the project. I'm going to talk a little bit more. We can probably breeze through what is rezoning. We've talked a little bit about that already. I'll share what are the outcomes of this project, and then the next steps. So first, I want to share just about the background of this project. If you want to go to the next slide. Perfect. Yeah. So this project, the AIR, which stands for Advancing Equity in Rezoning, text amendment to the zoning code, is intended to make the rezoning process more accessible, transparent, and equitable. It is not about equity in all development. It doesn't solve all of the city's equity problems, but it moves the ball forward in these areas specifically for the rezoning process. And the reasons why we're doing it, are threefold. Community feedback over the years. Again, we've been talking a lot about the citywide plans tonight. The citywide plans call for it. And there have also been concerns over the years over the disparate impacts of different kinds of rezonings. And so this project was conceived from the guidance in Blueprint Denver, which was adopted in 2019, that directed the city, recommends that the city create tools to increase access to the rezoning process, especially for underrepresented communities, change the way that we do rezoning in Denver. And so this project was launched 3 years ago to advance these recommendations in Blueprint Denver. On the next slide, by first assembling a diverse membership task force of 22 members appointed by the city council president or the mayor's administration, to include representation from the planning board, from city council, from registered neighborhood organizations, including several folks involved in INC or their R&Os, like Steve Harvey from Baker, Jill Noble. We've got 5 different folks who I don't see any of them here tonight, but I was just scanning the room for their names. I don't see any of them here tonight, but who represented R&Os as well as applicants, and kind of tried to build a diverse group in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of race, to represent a variety of perspectives. And so they have guided us throughout the last 3 years that this project has been happening. But we didn't stop there. That task force met 15 times to provide guidance about what to do around the rezoning process. The planning board and city council jointly met 3 times. We held 2 community open houses. And actually we were here with the INC ZAP committee. I looked it up back in March of 2022. So we were here a few months after the project started, and I'm now here a few months before it ends to give you the update. Hundreds of other folks have signed up or participated in emails or comments along the way. And it's not too late. Comments are still welcome through the remainder of the adoption phase that I'll talk about tonight. So here's the overview of how long we've been at this and the project schedule. Started by identifying what's the problem with the rezoning process today. What should we do about it? Got some guidance on what the preferred approach was. We've been working on drafting that. And now today you can see in the blue bubble, we're late in 2024. I'm looking forward to public adoption here in the next few months. So that's where we've been and why we've been doing it. Before I get into what's proposed to be changed, I wanted to just spend a couple slides making sure we're all clear what I mean by rezoning. I talked about this earlier, so hopefully I can be quick about it, but rezoning is different than zoning. Zoning is the body of laws that govern how property can be used and developed. And the whole concept is based on there are different zone districts, and what you can do depends on what district your property is located in. And so, you look up on the map, I'm in this district, then you look up in the book, what can I do in that district? That's what zoning is. On the next slide, when we're talking about rezoning, which is what this project is about, it's about a change in the rules for that property from one district to another district. So rezoning, that change in district or change in the map of the zoning, can be initiated by 2 different groups, either the property owners themselves or the city. A council member of the department can initiate a change in the map. And they help, we talked about earlier how they help advance recommendations from plans. They help the city evolve in a number of ways. And the simplified version of how that process works is someone applies, staff makes recommendations, the planning board make a recommendation, but in every case, city council has the final decision about whether to approve or deny that change in the zoning map, or the rezoning, like we say. And you can do a lot of different things rezoning. So you could change from one district that allows, say, 3 stories to a district that allows 5 stories. You could be changing it to reduce, excuse me, the size of lots allowed. So you could, instead of if you have a piece of property that could today fit 5 houses, you could rezone it to a district that would allow you to fit 7 with smaller lots. Or change in use, from a district that only allows industry to one that could allow apartments if apartments weren't allowed in. So those are some examples. I think it's really important to remember most development in Denver doesn't need a rezoning. So what I'm talking about here, this change in the zoning map, only about 10% of the major development in Denver gets a rezoning before the development. The other 90% are following their existing zoning rules. They're not the subject of this project at all. So we're really just talking about that 10% of major projects that need to change their rules and come to city council to ask permission to change their rules before they can develop. Okay, so what are we doing to change all of that process that I just talked about? Well, there are 4 key changes to the text of the code that I will talk about here on the left side, one at a time. And we're pairing those code changes with changes to the way that the Department of Community Planning and Development does business, that are changes to our standing operating procedures that aren't code changes. So I'll walk through each of them. The first is we're changing the review criteria. And in the interest of time, I won't walk through all of the details, but these are the discretionary criteria that City Council ultimately reviews to decide whether a rezoning should be approved or denied. The current criteria, some of them are out of date, some of them don't make sense. And so what the proposal that's come forth here from the task force is to clean them up, make them a little bit clearer to understand. There's still a lot of discretion in them, but change the rezoning review criteria to accomplish more of our objectives in advancing our adopted plans in the city. So that's one big change. The second big change is we're increasing the notice that's given for rezonings. So this particular part of notice is about the signs. Today, when you rezone, you post a sign before planning board, so folks know there's a hearing coming up and here's how to have your voice heard, and then another one at city council. But we're adding a new requirement for a sign even earlier in the process. When you first submit an application to rezone, you will now be required to post a sign after your application is complete for at least 15 days after the submittal of the application. So again, an opportunity for folks to learn that something is proposed to change here. Here's where you can go to learn more, and here's how you can provide feedback on it long before it's scheduled for planning board. So that's the second big change. The third change in text is we're changing who gets mailed notice of rezonings. So in Denver, over half of homes are rented. But right now, notice of a potential rezoning happening is mailed only to the owners of properties in proximity to a rezoning. This change will make it so that tenants as well will be mailed notice when they're located within 200 feet of an area proposed to be rezoned within the city and county of Denver. Now, there's on the next, you got it. Yeah, the next slide, we're also clarifying. This is more of a cleanup change, but we're clarifying where that radius applies to. In 2023, the voters approved a change to the city charter that affects the protest petition requirements, which I won't get into the interest of time, but it clarifies that the folks who get notice to participate in the Denver public hearing are folks in the city and county of Denver. So we're cleaning up the zoning code to match what the voters changed in the charter, which is that the folks who get notice of a rezoning are property owners and now tenants, which includes, business, not just residential tenants, but, business operators. And anyone who with a mailing address within 200 feet of the rezoning in the city and county of Denver will get that notice. And we'll continue what we already do. Like if you are near the city county boundary line and there are folks in other jurisdictions next door, Arapahoe County, Jefferson County, just for some examples, we encourage folks to reach out and let them know what they're planning to do because they may be interested, but the notices go to folks in the city and county of Denver. So those are the code changes to improve access to the process and the criteria. And then we're also at the same time updating our standard operating procedures for how rezoning applications work. So a big change that we are going to make up front is right now we heavily encourage folks before they apply in what we call the pre-application phase to reach out to their council district offices to learn who might have an interest in this, to those neighbors that I was just talking about, to community organizations. We give them a list of all registered neighborhood organizations within 200 feet, and we say, go talk to them before you apply, because if you don't, they're just going to get the notice from the city and then react to whatever you've proposed. Have that conversation early. Right now, that's currently strongly encouraged. What's going to change is we're going to require on your application that you document the outreach you did before you applied. And so everyone will be able to see that. So that's the first thing we're going to be doing. We're also updating our materials to make them easier to understand, make it easier to find out more information about what does a zone district mean when you get that postcard in the mail, when you get the email from us. How can we'll scrub out some of that legalese and make it easier to understand and also easier to access more information. We'll also be creating guides for applicants and members of the community to better understand how the rezoning process works. It's this complicated 6-month process. It's not easy, so we're going to be improving our guidance around that for folks. We're also going to be expanding the work that we do when we make a recommendation on a rezoning in what we write about it and how we present it to city council to call attention to some of the things that are really important from our adopted plans, as we heard from the community, including recommendations in the plans that relate to equity and that relate to climate change. We're also going to be building on this pilot that we've been doing for the last few years to look more closely at equity for projects of a certain size and scale where the impacts could be greater than perhaps on a single site, small rezoning. And we're also be developing templates. Sometimes folks want to commit to do more, but they don't know how to do that. So we're going to be developing commitments, voluntary commitment templates for folks who want to make commitments at the time of rezoning to one thing or another. And then alongside this project, but not part of the project, we also have other things that have come up through the project that folks wanted us to pursue, that are continuing to go on. I've already talked earlier about the legislative rezoning, so I won't mention that again. But a second one here that arose from this advancing equity and rezoning process that folks thought was important is that we should also be looking at how do we incentivize or require affordable housing in projects that are fewer than 10 units, where today, because it isn't financially feasible, they don't have to provide affordable housing on site. They do pay a linkage fee, but they don't provide housing on site in projects of fewer than 10 units. We'll be looking at that, as well as how we allow more of those smaller types of housing products in more parts of the city, like duplexes, triplexes, row houses, in appropriate locations around the city. So as I mentioned earlier, starting next year, we'll kick off a project that'll take a couple of years to examine how do we do that and explore affordability in those kinds of projects. So yeah, I think I'm on to my last section here, which is just this one slide, what the next steps are, and then I'll stop and see if there are any questions. So this moved out of the Land Use Transportation Infrastructure Committee today, so it's tentatively scheduled for its final public hearing at City Council on Monday, February 3rd. And if council adopts it then the changes will apply going forward to all rezonings after February 25th. And I did that. Yeah, so that's all I've got. I'm happy to try to answer any questions or follow up with you if I can answer them.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. That was great. It looks like we only have one question so far. Actually, another one just came through. The first question is from Lisa Williams. Can you define public interest?
That is a great question. So the short answer is no, right? The way review criteria, I think this is coming from the review criteria. There's a new review criterion proposed for City Council to consider whether to adopt or whether to approve or deny a rezoning that asks, is this rezoning in the public interest? It is a discretionary criterion that will allow staff, planning board, and City Council to consider the circumstances of a rezoning in deciding whether or not it should be approved. What staff will evaluate in whether a rezoning is in the public interest is whether it's consistent with the city's adopted plans. The long-range planning processes include extensive community involvement to define what is in the public interest for those areas of the city, or in the case of the citywide plan, the citywide goals. So we'll be relying on that guidance for our recommendation, but then again, planning board and City Council can determine on a case-by-case basis whether the rezoning meets that criteria, just as they can today.
All right, got a question from Jennifer. Are you saying that planning is not notifying neighbors, but the individuals seeking a zoning change are doing this? And do you really think this is accountability?
Well, so the way the process works today, the City Council changed the code a few years ago that requires the Denver Planning Department to mail, hard copy mail through the post office, a notice to the owners of property being rezoned and the owners of property within 200 feet of the property being rezoned. So that's how it works today. It happens twice in a rezoning process. It happens first when someone applies, and it happens again 15 days before the planning board public hearing. What's changing is that this would now require the city to also mail those notices to anyone with an address, so tenants within that same boundary. That's what the city is required to do. That's the minimum. What we also urge, and what will now be required for applicants to show, is what they're doing, what outreach they do in addition to what's the minimum required by code, whether that's meetings, mailings, flyers, postings. And again, we're going to be putting guides together to help folks know what best practices are out there, where folks who've done this before have been successful, to share what they're planning to do, but also engage in meaningful dialogue about how what they're planning to do does or doesn't jive with what the vision of the community is and what they can do, what they should change in order to make it better.
Richard Wilson asks, you mentioned notification of rezoning requests would go out to property owners within 200 feet of a proposed rezoning location. Do you also notify property owners that might be outside the city limits, such as a rezoning request on the east side of Sheridan in Denver? Would you also notice a property owner on the west side of Sheridan that is located in Lakewood?
Yeah, good question. So this is what I was mentioning briefly, that the way the code works in terms of what's the minimum requirement, it is for folks that's proposed. It is for folks who are located within the city and county of Denver. In 2023, so last year, the voters voted on a change to the charter, which is like the constitution of the city, that that changed who can protest a rezoning in order to make it so that only folks who own property in the city and county of Denver can protest a rezoning in the city and county of Denver. There were a number of these rezonings that were close to the city boundary line where folks out of county who, showed up and protest. In fact, in one case, showed up, protested a rezoning, and then turned around and sold their property and did something else with it without affording Denver the opportunity to participate in their process. So the voters did change the charter in 2023 so that only folks in Denver can protest. And this change does align our mandatory notification requirements with that voter approved change to notify just the folks in city and county of Denver. Again, we do recommend folks reach out to others who might be impacted, but that is not a code requirement that they do.
Can you clarify something for me, Kyle? Because my brain
Yeah.
is thinking about the 50% owners and renters. And is the mailing going to the list on the assessor? So if it's an owner that rents it, whatever the ownership address is where that postcard gets mailed, not to the address. But now, in addition to, it's going to be sent to that owner and additionally to the residents. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's two totally different mailing lists. So yeah, first, just like today, the owner's list comes from the assessor's record. So the owner may be in New York, but they get a postcard, right?
Okay.
A landlord perhaps. And so that'll work the same in the future as it does today. What's new is we also have a database. It essentially comes from groups that do like mass marketing, kind of like post office, of every address in the city. And we update that as new addresses are issued, with new development. So that now everyone with an address within 200 feet will also get, just be addressed to resident or occupant, or we don't have the names of everyone who lives in every house or who operates every business, but every address point will also get a mailing. So it could be if an owner resides, in their own home, they'll get a notice because they're owner, and they'll get also the notice because they have an address. They'll get notice twice by the city.
Okay. Random question. Was that accounted for in the budget? Because isn't that postage going to go up because more mailings are going to go out?
Great question. Yeah. And so there are two different answers to that. For a proactive legislative rezoning that the city's initiated, like I was talking about earlier, that is something that the city will have to pay for. That it's still relatively minimal in the course of city business. But for owner-initiated rezonings, which are the bulk of them, and that is what this project is addressing, the applicants bear the cost. So even though the city's doing the mailing, we then invoice that applicant.
Good to know.
For all of the costs. Yeah.
Okay. And then it looks like there's another question from Cindy. How long will public notification boards be up until the hearing with the new regulations?
Great question. Yeah. So they're all defined. There's 3 different signs, and the periods are all defined in code. So the first one, after you have a complete application, has to be up for a minimum of 15 days. Unless you're scheduled for your hearing and need to replace that sign with your next sign, right? So if that goes sooner than that, which is very rare, but sometimes it happens, then you only have to have one sign on a property at a time is the way that works. So this is trying to strike a balance, because we also got some feedback in the process. Like, you don't want a sign that just stays up for months while people negotiate and it gets blown down in the wind. So the first sign goes up for 2 weeks, 15 days. The second sign goes up for 15 days and the third sign goes up for 21 days.
Awesome. Any other questions? This is our last time to ask a question in 2024. Is that how we're gonna end? Anybody else? No?
You can always reach out later. I'm happy to take any questions you get, Amber. Or
And
Joel.
then everybody, you guys will get a copy of the presentation. I will get a copy of the presentation from Councilwoman Torres, which also has the community benefit agreement broken down for Ballerina in there. That she went over very briefly, we covered at the end of her presentation. And then we are hoping to get a recording up, I'm gonna say by the new year, on the YouTube for everybody that missed it, or if you want to rewatch. So with that, our last slide for Joel and I is really, again, what we kind of touched on in the beginning about needing to hear from you guys about what you want to hear about, what's valuable to you, things that you know that are coming that would be of interest to share with our audience. So our emails are at the bottom, or you can also email the INC Zap email as well, and we will get back to you. But with that, I'm gonna say a nice little thank you for everybody that's come and coming, and to Michael for starting INC, for starting the ZAP committee. I mean, we wouldn't be here without you. So I really appreciate your dedication. To Keith for his leadership over the last couple years, and then to Joel, the new co-chair who's already rocking it, and to all of you guys for coming. And I'll leave it for you to say our final goodbye, Joel.
Yeah, again, just reiterating what Amber said, thanks everyone for joining. I know it's the holiday season, but I think these are really important topics, as do I know each of you. I did put my contact information in the chat. I really do mean it. If you want to reach out and grab coffee, I'm happy to do so. We can just casually talk about Denver stuff, or we can, really get in the weeds, and I'd love to learn more about anything that any of you are experts on, or things that you'd like to hear more about in future meetings. Also, we'll send out this date, but just want to tentatively say that our next meeting will likely be on February 25th. So just kind of jot that down in your calendar. We should have an invite for that with the official date and topic within the next few weeks. So thanks again to everyone, and have a great rest of your night.
And thanks again, Kyle and Councilwoman Torres. We really appreciate you guys making time during the holidays and after a long work day. So thank you. Endless gratitude to you. Have a good night.